Hello again, and welcome to this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Well, in today's episode, we're bringing some kind of a bummer bit of news. The fact that there is a looming ammunition shortage on the horizon. We've been hearing about this for a while, and Roy talked to a good friend that's actually involved in the international munitions market, and he confirmed what we've been hearing for the last several months, that everybody's loading ammunition as fast as they can, but none of it's going to recreational shooters. So I'm going to talk to Roy about what he's learned, and we talk about what the long-term ramifications for shooters will be. So let's talk to Roy about the looming ammunition shortage. Well, good morning, Roy.
Yeah, what's good about it?
Oh, it's going to be one of those days. Well, actually, that's kind of a one of those topics, I guess. Yeah. So we're going to leap right into it. This is breaking news. I should have that little noise effect. This is something we've actually seen on the horizon for a while, and we've been talking about it. And you and I have been talking about it kind of behind the scenes since before NRA, and we've both been gathering information from our various channels, and it's pretty undeniable at this point. You spoke with somebody who is well entrenched in international events, and everybody said the same thing. There ain't no powder. So we're going to talk about that today. And before you shut off the podcast and go rushing out to buy 50 pounds of reloading powder, it'll be okay. Let's keep our heads and our wits about us. But Roy, let's talk about this. So I guess basically, what are you hearing?
Well, I almost didn't want to do this podcast.
I know.
Because we're going to be accused as hate mongers, and we're going to be accused as being part of a conspiracy, with the black jackbooted thugs, and it's not the case. I mean, I've been in this industry for 40 years. I know where the secrets are. Yeah. And there isn't any secret here, and there wasn't any conspiracy here. And basically, it's not our fault that Russia invaded Ukraine. It's not our fault that the kerfuffle is going on in Israel right now. Yeah. And we have an obligation to help those people. And part of that obligation is to send them munitions. And it's hard to plan for those kind of things. And so, what I like to do is, and there's no way around this, so we just have to go over the facts. And I know in spite of that, I'm sure there's still going to be people out there who are going to say, well, yeah, you guys just don't know what you're talking about. It's like, okay, well, whatever. We do. But yeah, in a nutshell, I have contacts in the industry and in the international arms industry. And these are not guys who sell rusty AK-47s that get delivered to Somalia in a leaky fishing boat. These are people who go to the International Arms Symposium in Dubai. Right? Yeah. Where everywhere you look are 5-star generals and stuff like that. So these people buy and sell millions of rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition.
Yeah.
They
big toys.
Yeah, they sell fighter airplanes and destroyers, to countries. And so, and I think what we need to remember though is that in that side of the industry, they deal in numbers that the consumer side is almost not even on their radar.
Right.
So the powder that Hodgdon uses or Winchester and stuff like that, it's I almost want to say it's like, well, that's cute. Yeah. I mean, it's like there's a scoop there.
Yeah.
Pardon me. I think the FBI is already after me, maybe. My one friend who we're going to quote from extensively today just got back from this Munitions Executive Summit, which was in New Jersey. And it says, sustaining the industrial base and increasing production during 2 global conflicts. So this was specifically about what's going on right now and how basically the world is trying to meet this threat from Russia. So before we go on too far, though, I want to remind American shooters is that we are by and large hobby shooters. And so most of what we do is because we like to do it or we want to do it. And so if there's a shortage of powder or components, while we may not like it, we have to remember that these components are going to places like Ukraine and places like Israel, and they're being used to kill bad guys. And so if you can't not shoot the weekend match, without having a hissy fit, then you need to seriously rethink your commitment. Yeah, I hope, I don't mean to sound that, strong, but it's the case. I mean, during World War II, you couldn't get guns and ammunition here domestically, so people were really careful. But in those days, people went, well, that's okay. I'd rather my GI son has a 30-06 round where he's over in the war, fighting.
Right.
And right now, I think that things like a war in Ukraine or what's happening in Israel, people are so far distanced from that, they don't understand that has a similar significance. Let me throw some numbers out here. And I happen to know that domestically right now, there are U.S. manufacturers who manufacture components and ammunition who are essentially out of powder. Okay? So they've been using supplies. Most of the domestic manufacturers have had about a 40% increase in the cost of powder and components, and no one has really passed that on to consumers yet. But it's going to happen because I can't continue to absorb that. I predict that it's going to be in increments, like maybe 10% increase and another 10% and another 10% like that until they can meet parity. So it is what it is. It's supply and demand. So, but this will give you a little idea. It says here, Ukraine assistance commitments. Okay, we've given them 70 105 millimeter howitzers, 150 155 millimeter howitzers, 190 mortar weapon systems. Okay, so far those are like interesting numbers, right? But they don't sound huge. Non-standard ammunition, 15.8 million rounds, and so that might be tracer ammunition and stuff like that. Shoulder-launched munitions, so, anti-tank guns. Now, this is what we've given them. 61,000 of those. We've given them 145,000 mortar rounds. Over 202 million small arms ammunition rounds, for their AKs and their whatever. Over 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition. Medium caliber ammunition, 1.9 million rounds. And from what I understand, that's like 20 millimeter, 30 millimeter, that kind of stuff. 43,000 rounds of tank ammunition. 572,000 hand grenades. And demolition pyrotechnics and room clearing kind of explosives and rounds, 772,000. So what we've been doing is we're shipping now remember, that's just Ukraine. We're not talking about Israel here too, and I don't have numbers on that. But what we need to remember though is that these are coming from our reserve stocks. Okay, so all those warehouses that you see, in Indiana Jones, full of boxes and crates of ammunition, all that stuff is being shipped over there. Which apparently, from what I understand from this arms community, the domestic guys aren't really upset about that because that's older stuff. Maybe a lot of the new stuff has better technology involved, and so they're actually not overly upset about the fact that that's being used up because it lets us manufacture more stuff. Except one thing, right? That has to come from somewhere. And I really learned something interesting. We bandy this term nitrocellulose about. Oh, well, we're out of nitrocellulose and we can't make ammunition. Well, what is nitrocellulose? So I actually looked into it, and there's one plant in the United States that makes nitrocellulose. And I'll read this here. It says, all U.S. mill standard nitrocellulose is made under a run by BAE Systems. That's another one of those big companies, right? At the U.S. Army Radford Arsenal, they run 24/7 as a normal course of business. That means you can't put on another shift and make more nitrocellulose. You have to build another $500 million plant. And it says some of this goes to make cannon propellant. The rest goes to St. Mark's to make ammunition for the government, with a balance available for sale to large loaders and, for instance, Hodgdon for consumers. When it's all diverted to cannon propellants, there will be a huge problem in the ammunition industry, which you can now see starting to happen. And we'll cover that. But what I found out was that nitrocellulose is made in the United States from southern white pine.
Oh.
And so what they do is they break it down like you're making paper, and you get it all of uniform length, strips and stuff like that, and you refine it and all that kind of stuff. And you soak it in nitric acid, and then other magical chemical things happen. And what you end up with then is you end up with nitrocellulose, which is the base for manufacturing different kinds of and grades of gunpowder. We have one plant in the United States who makes that. And right now, it's all going toward refilling the backlog of our empty warehouses where we've given all this ammunition away. And it's says here, I thought this was really interesting. We've given more than 2 million 155 millimeter artillery shells to Ukraine. Each one takes 21 to 25 pounds of triple base extruded powder to fire. We gave them that out of inventory. They're now being replaced, but here is the progression. Now, this is what's interesting, and I'm actually reading what he sent me when I asked him. I said, "Can you explain this to me, please?" He says, 2 years ago, we were at 100% gunpowder and making, so that means we had 100% gunpowder supply was coming in. And we were making 14,155 millimeter shells per month. Now we are at 50% gunpowder, meaning that we're getting 50% as much as we used to get, okay? And we're making 30,000 of the same shells per month. But there's another plant that will soon bring up the total to 80,000 per month. And at that point, there will be zero commercial powder available from either IMR or St. Mark's, because they all use the output of the one nitrocellulose plant and the one small arms ball gunpowder plant we have in America. And he says, and that's not counting the fact that the Europeans have made over 700,000 155 millimeter rounds that they've sent to Ukraine. And so basically what's happening here is that the raw powder source that's going to commercial manufacture of artillery shells and things like that is down significantly, and then we're over manufacturing, so the reserves are being depleted, and then we have an obligation, of course, to keep the military supplied, because we can't have empty warehouses. And so rather than have Sam and Susie Homemaker go shoot 9mm this weekend, that powder is going toward these efforts to both help our allies and to keep America safe, as it were. Yeah. So this was what I thought was interesting. I asked one contact, I said, well, he has a lot of experience with this. How long will this last? And he said, to make 2 million 155 millimeter rounds at 80,000 per month, which is what we've given Ukraine. So now we have to restock, right? This is after the Israeli and Ukraine conflicts end. That will take over 2 years. Okay? So if it ended tomorrow and we stopped shipping over there, it would take 2 years to replenish our reserves. That's at 80,000 per month. At 30,000 per month, it will be a 50% powder from the U.S. for 5 years. So they could either do 80,000 a month and use all the powder, or do 30,000 per month, and it would be about 50% of the powder from the U.S. And so either way, it's 5 years. It's going to be 4 to 5 years. As one gentleman told me, he said, now, just as when we had the primer shortage, there will be some manufacturers overseas that will step in, and we may have some powder supplies from overseas, and for domestic consumer use. He actually said an interesting thing. China makes all of their nitrocellulose out of hemp, and he said that's not something we do here, but maybe it's time for us to start looking at that. Yeah. And so So that's basically in a nutshell. I know it was a lot of numbers and it was a lot of complicated information, but in a nutshell, our helping our allies has depleted our reserves. So the limited powder manufacturing ability we have in the United States is being diverted to regroup or recoup those reserves. Consequently, you will see a decreasing amount available on the consumer market. And so now, Brent, we need to talk about what should American shooters do.
Well, before we get into that, I wanted, you gave me so much there to unpack, but I wanted to add a couple of comments because I've been doing my own research and talking with folks, and they mirror exactly what you're saying, that pretty much everything is going to either the war effort or to replenish our stocks. And another point is, and you kind of touched on it, this isn't just an America problem. We're kind of the big dog, but there's other countries providing aid, and also other countries rearming themselves. So everybody's kind of in this same boat, especially some of the European countries. If you follow much in the way of geopolitics, I'll say, for example, Germany. Apparently they decided, 15 years back that there wasn't going to be any more wars or land wars in Europe. And they've kind of let their stocks dwindle. And now you've got, I believe, Sweden and some other countries that have joined NATO, and they've realized, oh gosh, if Russia takes Ukraine, they're probably going to not stop there. So they're suddenly in the market to purchase, not just replenish, but actually increase their stocks. Basically, the world went through a fairly peaceful period, and apparently our leaders decided there will not be any more wars to end all wars. And I certainly hope so. But warfare is a feature of mankind, and we're hitting this kind of new time in our history where we're seeing more war. And basically our capacity to build the tools for war has gone away a little bit. So that's kind of the macro scale situation, at least as I understand it, and talking to people with far bigger brains than I've got. But basically, it's the world's going, at least rearming and fighting a war or two. And we, on the tail end of that, the hobbyists, we're going to get the scraps. So that's kind of where we're at. So anything you want to add to that, Roy, or you can proceed in what should we do?
Well, I think it's inevitable. Yes, this is happening. Turn on the TV set, you see the war. You see, yep. We have no idea when they're going to end. And all of these numbers I'm giving you is based on what's been done so far. Well, maybe this is all going to be doubled over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
We don't know. And like you say, if Russia decides, we would rather have Finland too, mm-hmm. Now suddenly that's even more. And so I think what American shooters need to do is sort of let's get off our high horses for a while and don't do the poo-poo pouty face. In other words, this is pretty serious stuff. This is happening now. We have an aggressor over there. They're trying to take over basically an innocent country. And we can either decide that we want to throw our sucker in the dirt and be mad because we don't have 22s to go plinking, or we can join forces a la World War II, for instance, and support what needs to be done. And so, in the last few kerfuffles where there was this ammunition buying frenzy, I was thinking about that. And there are, I don't know, hundreds of millions of rounds of ammunition in private hands in the United States.
Yep.
And Lord knows how many thousands of tons of powder suitable for reloading, and tens of millions of primers. And, and so I have a feeling, since the market abhors a vacuum, what's going to happen is we will see people releasing some of this stuff from their private reserves, manufacturers, whatever, big dealers who have a warehouse full of, primers that they've stocked up on. We'll be seeing that stuff come out. And yes, it's going to cost a lot of money. and there's nothing we can do about it. So you can either participate and pay for it, so you can go deer hunting Friday, or you can sit it out. Yep. And I'm frankly, but I have a modest selection of gunpowder for reloading. I have some primers and some bullets, and I'm just not going to be nuts.
Yeah.
In other words, if this weekend I'm not going to shoot 500 rounds at steel plates. You might shoot 2 or 3 magazine fulls and say, or don't shoot at all. Go take your wife out to dinner. Yeah. But whining and complaining about it and pointing fingers and saying it's a government conspiracy is not going to change anything. And I know people are going to disagree, and they're going to say, well, you're part of the problem because you're telling us to don't worry about it. And I'm not saying don't worry about it, but I'm saying that when faced with the inevitable, as what we apparently are faced with right now, I think we need to accept it with a certain amount of pragmatism.
Yeah. And, for my take on this, the people that I get panic buying, especially among the less experienced. Look, 2 years ago, folks buying guns that have never been shot, or they've been shot 5 times and they're still sitting in the sock drawer. I at least understand that. What I don't understand, and I've got, Roy, both of us have good friends who have said during the last ammo shortage, I went out and bought, 20 cases, or I bought 100 pounds of reloading powder. And you say, well, why'd you do that? Well, I don't want to be without. Are you ever going to use that? Oh, probably not, but I don't want to be without. There's no right or wrong answer here, but if you look at your own stockpile and think, short of, not short of anything, just I will never utilize any percentage of this, then why do it? Because all that's doing, I don't even think that's a pragmatic matter. If I want to be prepared, it's I want to have it so you can't. I really think that's what the psychology there is. And we need to be thinking about, again, I'm not saying don't go buy ammo, or if you want to shoot 500 rounds this weekend, just understand there's going to be less of it. You're going to pay more for it, and we'll make it worse if we all decide, hey, let's screw everybody else and buy every primer, every 7 pounds of powder, every box of ammo I can possibly afford, so I can set on them, put them in my storage unit, they'll gather dust, and when I die, my kids will have to sell them to a wholesaler.
Well, and just like happened, and listen, please, everyone, every single time before that there's been an ammunition shortage, prices went up, people hoarded, people stockpiled, it was ridiculous, right? And guess what happened? When that was over, prices went back down.
Yeah.
I mean, just the other day, I saw $10 a box 9mm ammo.
Yep.
Well, when it was nuts, it was $40 a box, and I kept telling people, stop, don't buy it. I mean, this too shall pass. If we rein ourselves in, if we tighten our belts, if we just realize that, for the next 3 to 5 years, it's not going to be like it was 5 years ago where we had unlimited everything. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. That's just the way it is, and if we don't abuse it, if we do things in moderation, if we find another hobby to supplement our shooting hobby for the next 3 or 5 years, take up kayaking or something, but that will help this to pass faster.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, the faster, as my friend said, 3 years if they manufacture at this rate, 5 years if they manufacture at this rate. So I would say let them manufacture at the high rate. Let's regroup and recoup our resources, and let's hope the wars get over fast.
Yeah.
And then things will get back to normal sooner. And I hate to use that analogy, but it's like World War II. I mean, for 4 years you had, I don't know what it was, 2 gallons of gas a week was what you got in the ration book, Yeah. And now granted, we don't have that problem, but with the shooting thing, just pretend, put your mind there and just say, you know what, I'm going to be conservative for the next few years. If my kids are coming over this weekend and we're going to plink in the backyard, everybody gets a 50-round box of 22s from my stash.
Yeah.
Everyone doesn't get a brick, and we'll all live. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And one other thing, I actually know a guy that bought a bunch of stuff with the idea of it was an investment. Well, a basic rule of capitalism is if you buy things during the crisis, if you don't immediately turn around and sell them if they go up, you're going to end up being holding the bag. Because like you pointed out, Roy, prices have come back down. So those guys that paid $40 a box thinking that I can sell this down at the range, if you're still holding on to it, you've lost money bad. So again, taking away that profit motive, because I know so many guys also with AR parts. You know, I bought 25 receivers. Well, did you ever sell them? No.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
They're worth half what you paid for them. That's not good investing, kids. So,
well, I mean, I know what's going to happen right now, and we'll be partly responsible for this because people will go to their local gun stores
and buy
every bit of powder they can afford. They will buy every box of 30 they can find. And like you say though, is I have no idea why, because the guy, it's like I talked to one guy in the last buying frenzy. He bought 20,000 rounds of 223 and paid pretty much top dollar for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like $550 a case when it normally was $180 a case.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what are you going to do with that? And as you said, it's like, well, you know, I've got it in case, you know, the government takes over or something. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, have you ever actually carried a case of 223 ammo out to your truck? You know, I mean, now what are you going to do with 20,000 rounds? And we just need to not overreact like that. I mean, if we've always been able to survive all of these kind of things, and so we will survive this one. And it's not like it's threatening us at anything. For the vast majority of us, like I said, this is a hobby. We do it for fun. And really, if you've got a box of 50-38 specials and a 4-inch Model 10, you are adequately armed to protect your family for the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah. You know,
when's the last time you heard of a non-military confrontation that required 25,000 rounds to fix the problem? It ain't gonna happen. So
no, and it's not nice. And I know I don't like the fact that I just won't be able to go to the gun store and buy a pound of unique powder, probably.
Yeah.
You know, but the other side of that coin is I also don't do other things because I can't afford them or they're not available, and you know, and life goes on. So
exactly.
I think the biggest thing we did today was we at least tried to give some backstory as to why this is happening. No, it's not a conspiracy. No, companies like Winchester and Federal and Remington, they are not purposefully stockpiling powder to raise consumer prices. You know, they don't want to do that. You know, so right now, and what I said is absolutely true. Most of these companies have absorbed the increases that they've been having to pay to get powder and components, but they will be passing those on. And so, I mean, really, if the advice I would give is look at your shooting habits, and if you shoot a box of 9mm on the weekend, well, then look at what that's going to take for you over the next 3 to 5 years, and then sort of plan around that. Maybe cut that in half. You know, I mean, maybe go every other weekend for the next 3 to 5 years or less. So, but just be reasonable. Don't be crazy. And, you know, there's no need for rioting in the streets. And I can't stress enough to remember that this American-made nitrocellulose, you know, based powders are going to protect people whose freedoms are being attacked right now.
Yep.
And if you can't give up your weekend 9mm pistol match for that, I don't know what to say.
Good point. And I wanted to add one quick thing before we go is there are alternatives, and we've talked about them in the past. The world of air rifles or pneumatic rifles or whatever term you want to use, they're at the highest level of technology they've ever been. You can do some really good shooting with even, you know, spending $400 or $500 on an air rifle. So I live in town and I have a fenced-in backyard with a privacy fence. It would be illegal for me to shoot, but when you have an air rifle, it's a little bit easier. So same thing is, if you can't get ammunition but you still want to shoot, you might consider air rifles, air pistols, because they'll they'll challenge you as much as anything. So I'm not saying it's a one-to-one substitute, but if you just want to press the trigger and keep your skills up, that's an alternative to look at. So
I think that's a very important thing, Brent. And I kind of forgot that whole angle of things, archery and crossbows and air rifles and
slingshots,
airsoft, spears.
Yeah.
You can still go boar hunting if you want to in Arkansas, because that's how they do that there. But you're right. Actually, that's a brilliant idea. Go buy a Red Ryder BB gun, and when your kids come over for the weekend, go out and shoot Necco wafers, and it's a lot cheaper too. So
exactly.
Right.
Well, good stuff, Roy. Well, actually, no, not good stuff, but it is what it is. And like you said, the word pragmatic really sticks out as this is the way it is. Even if you believe it's a conspiracy, this is the way it is, and it's going to be for a little while. So be thinking about it, but don't be hoarding, because that just makes it worse. And you're part of the problem if you hoard. So
that's it.
Anyway, Roy, well, hopefully the global ammunition conspiracy won't come after us after this episode, but we do try to bring the latest news to our audience, and we're blessed, especially to have Roy, but we're both fairly well plugged into the industry, so we want to let you guys know what's going on for the good and the bad. So anyway, thanks again for joining us, Roy.
You bet. I wish we had better news.
As always, Roy had a lot of great insights and insider information on the looming ammunition shortage, and hopefully you'll understand why it's happening, how it's going to affect you, and please pay heed. Don't go out and hoard. It's not helping any of us. Well, before I go, I would like to remind you, please check out our publications at FMG. That would be Guns Magazine at gunsmagazine.com, American Handgunner Magazine, AmericanHandgunner.com, and of course, AmericanCop.com. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody who works here at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you once again, now get out there and get shooting as long as you have ammunition.